The information in this video comes from thorough research. Please share your thoughts on the video Grigori Rasputin in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think. Rasputin was a man who was simultaneously seen as a prophet and a devil in Russian history. Fyodor Dostoevsky. Grigori Rasputin was a Russian mystic and self-proclaimed holy man who claimed to have supernatural powers. Eventually, he even went so far as to found his own spiritual school. Rasputin became deeply involved with the Romanov royal family, to the point where they believed he was a holy man sent by God. While he was manipulating the Romanovs, he also began influencing Russian politics. Many experts believe that Rasputin was one of the key factors that led to the downfall of the Romanov dynasty. Some priests at the royal court believed Rasputin truly had supernatural abilities, while others were convinced he was possessed by a demonic force. Rasputin himself often told those around him that he was in a constant battle between good and evil. Grigori Rasputin was born on January 21, 1869, in a small village called Pokrovskoye in southern Siberia. Back then, Siberia was a place where criminals and political exiles were sent to live in harsh labor camps. Alongside convicts, people with religious beliefs that went against the state were also exiled there. The climate was brutally cold and life was hard. Survival required strength and resilience. Rasputin's father was a farmer and a courier. Before Grigori was born, his parents had already lost 7 children, either at birth or during early childhood, mainly due to the extreme cold. Grigori was the only child who managed to survive those deadly Siberian winters. From a young age, Rasputin claimed he received divine visions and had supernatural powers. Some people believed him, calling him a man touched by God. Others thought he was possessed by the devil. Occasionally, he performed strange acts, like healing a sick horse just by touching it. Although the details are unclear, some journalists later interviewed villagers who remembered these events. In his early 20s, Rasputin's behavior took a dark turn. He became a heavy drinker, often stole, and disturbed the peace in his village. By the age of 28, he was married with 4 children but still struggled with his vices. His addiction to alcohol worsened, possibly due to the harsh Siberian environment, though the exact reasons remain unclear. One day, he stole a horse. Overcome with guilt afterward, he went to a monastery and isolated himself in repentance. There, a monk named Markel took notice of him. Remember this name because he plays a key role in Rasputin's transformation. Makary became Rasputin's spiritual guide, encouraging him to purify his soul and devote his life to spirituality. He even suggested that Rasputin become a priest and serve both God and people. Rasputin accepted the advice and eventually left the monastery. He began traveling from village to village, preaching and offering religious guidance. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would eventually lead him into the heart of Russia's royal court. During his travels, Rasputin would occasionally wander into the Siberian forests, where he became acquainted with certain secretive groups. One of these groups followed a sect known as the KHLYSDS. The KHLYSDS were a clandestine religious movement that had broken off from the Russian Orthodox Church, existing from the early 17th century all the way into the late 20th century. Members of this sect would secretly gather in the Siberian woods on Saturday nights to perform their rituals. They believed in a direct connection between the individual and the Holy Spirit. However, their practices were bizarre and extreme. One such ritual involved strangling each other, placing hands on each other's necks, and squeezing tightly until the person being choked was on the brink of unconsciousness. Just before they passed out, the others would release their grip. This would supposedly induce a trance-like or euphoric state that they claimed brought spiritual ecstasy. Following this, the group would descend into a night of drinking, dancing, and total physical exhaustion, which eventually led to uninhibited sexual acts. They would engage in random sexual relations with whoever happened to be next to them, believing that these acts were part of their spiritual purification. Many researchers believe Rasputin may have been part of this sect during that period. However, his daughter, who later emigrated to the US, denied this in interviews, claiming that her father was merely studying the sect, not participating in it. The truth remains unclear, but a significant number of historians and researchers suspect that Rasputin was, at the very least, influenced by their beliefs. Rasputin continued his travels, preaching religious messages and offering advice to people along the way. He believed these journeys weren't just about helping others spiritually. They also helped him find inner peace and purify his own soul. After many years, he returned to his village and to his family. But when his family and neighbors saw him again, they were stunned. He looked disheveled and troubled, with wild eyes and an unsettling presence. Rasputin told them that during his travels, he had been chosen by God and had received divine powers. He even asked his wife to clear out the basement of their home so he could perform mystical rituals there with some of his followers. One day, Rasputin claimed to have received a divine message from the Virgin Mary, commanding him to go to St. Petersburg and help the royal family. To outsiders, the idea of a peasant from Siberia assisting the mighty Romanov seemed ridiculous. But this is exactly where Rasputin's incredible rise began. Earlier in the story, we mentioned a man named Markel, a spiritual mentor who guided Rasputin in his early religious journey. Makary had ties to court priests and high-ranking members of Russian society. Through these connections, Rasputin managed to make his way into important circles and meet influential people, even before setting foot in St. Petersburg. Some of these aristocrats traveled all the way to Rasputin's village just to meet him, seeking healing and spiritual guidance. They were convinced that he had some kind of extraordinary, mystical power. Rasputin, in turn, made sure to behave in ways that supported this image. Eventually, through Makary's connections, Rasputin found his way into St. Petersburg. There, he met two powerful figures, one of them a court priest and the other an archbishop named Hermogenes. The clergy were taken aback by Rasputin's wild appearance and intense gaze. A few of them believed immediately upon meeting him that he was divinely touched, a man not bound by normal human limitations. Rasputin didn't care what people said about him. He soon became part of the royal inner circle and gained the favor of many nobles, especially the women in the court. He easily befriended and joked with them, becoming a familiar presence. He grew particularly close with two noble women, Princess Milica and Anastasia of Montenegro. These women were not originally Russian, but were being considered for marriage into the Romanov family. They had a deep interest in mysticism and were easily drawn to spiritual movements. The court priests, as much as they could, took advantage of their openness to manipulate them. All of this happened at just the right time. Tsarina Alexandra, the wife of Tsar Nicholas II, had recently lost her personal advisor, Dr. Philippe, and was desperately searching for a new spiritual guide, someone who could bring her emotional and mental comfort. It was during this period that Princess Milica introduced Rasputin to the royal family. Alexandra, having heard rumors of Rasputin's supernatural powers, saw him as the perfect opportunity, not only to bring peace to her own troubled soul, but also to help heal her son, Alexei. Alexei, the heir to the Russian throne, was born with hemophilia, a serious disorder that affected his blood's ability to clot. During one royal event, the family met Rasputin. Upon simply looking into his eyes, they claimed to feel a divine presence within him. Interestingly, they never shared any medical details about Alexei's condition with Rasputin. Yet, when Alexei suffered a severe health episode, Rasputin mysteriously appeared and claimed he could heal the boy. He began by sharing specific details about Alexei's illness that left the royal couple in shock. How could Rasputin know all of this without being told? Unbeknownst to them, Rasputin had secretly learned the details from Princess Milica beforehand. Still, he went to Alexei's room, asked the doctors to leave, and began a spiritual healing process. Remarkably, Alexei's condition began to improve. Many believe this was just another stroke of luck for Rasputin. He had simply told the doctors to stop giving Alexei aspirin, which was worsening the boy's condition due to his blood disorder. The cessation of aspirin led to an improvement in Alexei's health, and the family took this as a miraculous sign of Rasputin's divine power. Over time, Rasputin became more deeply embedded in the royal family. He began supplying the Tsar and Tsarina with opium, morphine, and cocaine. The Tsar became addicted and insisted that Rasputin visit regularly, claiming he felt more peaceful and clear-headed under his influence. Alexandra, suffering from depression and chronic headaches, also turned to Rasputin for spiritual healing and relief. Eventually, Rasputin started spending more time with the children, especially the royal daughters, acting almost like a nurse or guardian. However, the court nurses weren't pleased. Rasputin frequently visited the girls' rooms at night, told them bedtime stories, and would caress them. The eldest daughter, who was entering puberty, became uncomfortable with his presence, and the nurses began to notice. One day, a nurse reported to Alexandra that she had witnessed something deeply troubling, that Rasputin may have sexually assaulted the eldest daughter. Some sources confirm this incident. Others claim it's unclear if it ever happened. Nonetheless, Alexandra, deeply devoted to Rasputin, chose to believe him and dismissed the nurse. Soon after, the head nurse also tried to keep Rasputin away from the royal children, but she too was dismissed. Rasputin remained in the palace with full access to the children and the royal family. Meanwhile, rumors of abuse and inappropriate behavior began circulating in St. Petersburg. Newspapers started picking up on the scandal, making Rasputin's presence in the royal court increasingly controversial. Eventually, the royal family decided to ask Rasputin to leave the palace in order to preserve the monarchy's reputation. They told him he should pretend he was leaving of his own will, and Rasputin agreed. Although he officially left the court, he still maintained close contact with the royal family. He moved into an apartment in St. Petersburg, where he could freely meet with his followers, most of whom were women. Many women visited him, invited him to their private gatherings, and would often gather around a table with Rasputin at the center. In these circles, Rasputin would usually remain silent. After some time, he would suddenly begin saying strange, mysterious things, then write incomprehensible phrases on paper. This behavior fascinated the women, making them feel like he was truly connected to some higher spiritual power. They believed he was receiving divine inspiration, which only deepened their admiration and made them want a closer relationship with him. Some of these relationships went beyond that of a spiritual advisor. They became more intimate, and he would spend nights with some of them. One of the most striking stories involves a woman named Alice Luctina, who was so devoted to Rasputin that she abandoned her husband and children to live with him in his apartment. Olga, another woman, became so obsessed with Rasputin that she told others to call him God and claimed he was divine. She spent a long time living with him. Neighbors reported hearing terrifying sounds coming from Rasputin's home: shouts, cries, and the sound of whips. They described hearing Olga screaming things like, "You are my God. I belong to you. You are my Christ." These disturbing events drew the attention of the St. Petersburg police, who began watching Rasputin closely. Eventually, the police summoned Rasputin and questioned him about the strange noises and constant visitors. Rasputin claimed he was just a single man, and there was nothing illegal about what he was doing. He was simply helping troubled women, some of whom paid for his spiritual services, like many others in society. But in truth, something darker was going on. Rasputin had created a cult-like atmosphere in his home. He would whip the women, telling them that this was the way to cleanse their sins. He had turned his apartment into a place of spiritual submission, punishment, and manipulation. These rumors soon reached the ears of the same priests who had once helped raise Rasputin to fame, those who believed he had divine gifts. One of them, along with the archbishop, summoned Rasputin and demanded answers. The archbishop accused him of being possessed by the devil and bringing shame to their religious order, since everyone knew he had been associated with the clergy. Rasputin denied everything, but the archbishop shouted, "The devil has taken over you. Your desires have destroyed your reason." He then picked up a whip and began beating Rasputin, saying he must be punished and cleansed just as he had done to women. One of the priests even helped. Despite the beating, Rasputin eventually returned to the royal family and warned Alexandra that the clergy were planning to assassinate him. As a result, the archbishop and the priest were both exiled to distant regions. One of them later escaped and fled to Finland. After all these dramatic events, Rasputin decided to leave the chaos of St. Petersburg for a while and return to his village to be with friends and family. Later on, it was confirmed that the priest and the archbishop had indeed plotted to kill him. The escaped priest wrote about it in his memoirs. He revealed that before their trial began, they hired a woman named Augustina to assassinate Rasputin. She had previously been a sex worker in St. Petersburg and had been horribly abused by one of her clients, so badly, in fact, that her nose was cut off. That trauma gave her a deep hatred for abusive men like Rasputin. She agreed to the mission and took a knife. She then traveled to Rasputin's village in southern Siberia and waited. Coincidentally, Rasputin had just received a telegram and had stepped out to respond to it. When he left the house, he saw the woman standing there. Thinking she was just a troubled soul in need of guidance, he approached her gently to offer advice. That woman pulled out a sharp blade and struck Rasputin several times in the right side of his stomach. She was so determined to kill him that she plunged the blade deep into his body before fleeing the scene. Rasputin was left lying in a pool of blood. Coincidentally, on that same day, another event occurred that would completely change the course of European history. The very day Rasputin was attacked, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated in Sarajevo, a key incident that triggered World War I. Rasputin was rushed to a hospital in Siberia, where his treatment began. His recovery went well, and he managed to escape what could have been certain death. While in hospital, he learned that a devastating war was breaking out in Europe. Concerned, he decided to send a letter to the Tsar, urging him not to involve Russia in the war. The letter read, "We are all drenched in blood. The calamity is great, and there is no end to sorrow." However, the Tsar paid no attention to Rasputin's warning. His mind was already made up. In Russia, the mood was upbeat. The youth flooded the streets of St. Petersburg, declaring full support for the Tsar and the Russian army, ready to restore the country's lost honor through war. Even monks left their posts to join the young fighters heading to the front lines. After a while, Rasputin recovered, left Siberia, and returned to St. Petersburg and the palace. During his absence, Empress Alexandra had been left alone, and Rasputin's influence only continued to grow. Once again, rumors spread that he and Alexandra were romantically involved. Regardless of the truth, Rasputin had significant political power. He had managed to replace several cabinet ministers in just 2 years. Yet, he lacked any real political education, which led to incompetent officials taking charge and sending Russian politics into disarray. World War I proved to be devastating for Russia. Millions of Russians died. Unemployment, poverty, and famine reached catastrophic levels, and the people began blaming the royal family for their suffering. It became clear that the monarchy had to go. Although Rasputin had survived the earlier assassination attempt, his health was gradually declining. He could no longer act as he once did and mostly made predictions and wrote ominous letters, claiming he would soon be killed or die naturally. In one of those letters, he wrote that God would take his life so that the Russian people might live. He saw himself as a sacrificial lamb for the nation. One of his most famous letters was addressed to Alexandra. "If one of your relatives attempts to kill me, not a single member of your family will remain alive 2 years from now. All will be killed by the people of Russia. Tell them I did all I could for them. I will be killed. Pray and stay strong." In one session of the Russian parliament, a representative strongly condemned Rasputin, calling him a demonic force. He said he was tired of seeing the country controlled by someone from Siberia and even threatened to personally kill Rasputin if he did not step down from power. One of Rasputin's enemies was Felix Yusupov, the husband of the Tsar's cousin. Felix had heard many rumors about Rasputin's relationships with women. Felix himself was married to a woman named Irina, said to be one of the most beautiful women in St. Petersburg. However, There were whispers in the palace that their marriage was cold and distant. Felix decided to use this to his advantage. He invited Rasputin to his home under the pretense that his marriage was in trouble and that Rasputin's presence and words might help heal their relationship. At first, Rasputin refused to go, but Felix eventually gained his trust and convinced him to visit. Meanwhile, Felix contacted two of his accomplices and told them to prepare. On the planned day, they picked up Rasputin and brought him to Felix's palace. They led him to the basement, where a small table was set up like a celebration, creating the illusion of a friendly gathering. But their true mission was clear: Rasputin's assassination. They told Rasputin that Irina was upstairs attending to the guests, even though in reality, there was no party at all. They invited him to help himself to the refreshments laid out in the basement. The table was full of food, cakes, and various kinds of alcoholic drinks. They poured him a drink, offered him a slice of cake, and told him to enjoy himself until Irina arrived. Rasputin, unsuspecting of any foul play, began to eat and drink. What he didn't know was that everything on the table, every bite and every sip, had been laced with cyanide. He consumed it all. Half an hour passed, then nearly an hour, but nothing happened. The people in the room began to get nervous. Some even started to believe that maybe Rasputin really did have some supernatural power, that somehow the poison had no effect on him. Unable to stand it any longer, Felix went upstairs, grabbed his pistol, and came back down. He aimed it at Rasputin and fired. Rasputin collapsed from the gunshot. To this day, it's unclear exactly how many people were in the room when it happened. Some accounts say 3, others up to 9. But what's clear is they were all there for one purpose: to kill Rasputin. They thought the job was done. They went upstairs, celebrating with a small victory party. But Felix grew suspicious again. One of the people with him was a doctor. Felix told him, "Come with me. We need to go check if he's really dead." They went back to the basement. The doctor bent down to feel for a pulse. Suddenly, Rasputin's terrifying eyes shot open. The doctor was so shocked he nearly fainted. Rasputin, still alive, stood up and bolted out of the basement. Felix screamed for the others to stop him. They all chased after Rasputin as he staggered out into the courtyard. He tried to climb over the fence to escape, but just as he was climbing, the group opened fire again. They riddled him with bullets. Rasputin fell to the ground. Still unsure whether he was truly dead, they tied up his hands and feet, put his body into a car, drove to a nearby river, and dumped him in. Days later, Rasputin's body was recovered from the river. Oddly, his hands were in a position that suggested he had been struggling underwater, possibly still alive, trying to escape. Some experts believe he died before he hit the water, but others think he might have survived even the second round of gunfire and died trying to save himself. Either way, Rasputin was finally dead. And just as he had predicted, shortly after his death, the Romanov family was executed by the Bolsheviks. From that point on, Russia was never the same again. If you have any experiences related to this topic, be sure to share them with us. Until the next episode, be mindful of the energies around you.